The ground is shaking, not from explosions, from footsteps, thousands of them, boots striking earth in perfect rhythm, breathing heavy, metal clinking, orders shouted, then swallowed by noise. Someone stumbles. No one stops. The air is wrong. Too still. Too quiet for this many men. A scream cuts through the formation, then vanishes. No echo. No response. The line keeps moving forward, even as faces begin to change. Eyes scanning left, right, behind. Something is missing. Someone is missing. A signal is raised. No reply. Another signal. Still nothing. The sound of marching begins to thin. Not all at once. Row by row. Men turn their heads and realize the ranks are no longer full. Not broken. Just gone. No bodies. No struggle. No warning. The officers shout to hold formation. Voices crack. Authority trembles. The path ahead looks the same as it did moments ago. Yet no one believes it is. The sun hasn't moved. Time hasn't moved. But something has changed. A command is given to halt. Only part of the force stops. The rest never does. Later, records will list numbers. Later, maps will be redrawn. Later, explanations will be suggested. But in this moment, with boots frozen mid-step, with weapons still loaded, with hearts racing, one question spreads faster than fear itself. Where did the rest of them go? The year was one of exhaustion. War had already reshaped borders, broken alliances, and consumed entire generations. Armies moved not with confidence, but with obligation, marching because stopping was no longer an option. This conflict was not new, but it had reached a critical phase. Supply lines were stretched thin. Communications were unreliable. Command structures were strained by constant pressure. The location chosen for this movement held enormous military importance. Control of it meant dominance over transport routes, reinforcements, and future operations. Losing it would mean strategic collapse. High command understood the risk. They also understood delay was worse. The decision was made quickly. Too quickly, some would later argue. Tens of thousands of soldiers were assembled, not elite forces, not fresh recruits, but men who had already seen enough to know fear and enough to obey despite it. They came from different units, different regions, different backgrounds. What united them was uncertainty. Rumors moved faster than orders. Whispers of failed patrols, unanswered transmissions, sections of territory that went silent without explanation. Official briefings dismissed these reports as confusion, fatigue, enemy misinformation. But soldiers listened to patterns, not speeches. And the pattern was clear. Something was wrong in that direction. Still, the march was approved, because holding ground was more important than understanding it. The area itself was difficult to control, vast, unforgiving, prone to sudden changes in weather and visibility. Maps were outdated almost as soon as they were printed. Navigation depended on coordination. Coordination depended on communication. And communication was already failing. As the force prepared to move, tension settled over the camps. Not panic, something colder. A quiet acceptance mixed with unease. Letters were written. Equipment was checked twice. Silences grew longer. No one said it out loud. But many believed this march would not be simple. Not because of the enemy, but because of what waited in the unknown spaces between orders. The war demanded movement. So they marched. They were trained to move as one. From the first day of instruction, discipline was everything. How to stand, how to walk, how to wait, how to follow orders without hesitation. Individual thought had a place, but only after obedience. Daily routines were rigid. Wake before dawn, equipment inspection, formation drills, silence during meals, constant readiness. Punishment for mistakes was swift, harsh, unquestioned. Yet within that structure, bonds formed. Men learned each other's habits, who woke early, who stayed quiet, who joked too much when nervous. Fear wasn't discussed. It didn't need to be. They had already survived battles, retreats, losses that were never fully explained. Each carried memories they did not share. Before the march, the mood shifted. Not outwardly, but subtly. Conversations stopped when officers passed. Jokes didn't land the same way. Sleep came harder. Orders emphasized unity, staying together, maintaining formation at all costs. Breaking ranks was not just discouraged, it was forbidden. The soldiers understood why. In chaos, separation meant disappearance. Yet even within the safety of structure, doubt crept in. Some noticed compasses behaving strangely. Others reported sounds at night that didn't belong to any known unit. These concerns were logged, then ignored, because acknowledging them would mean delaying the operation. And delay was unacceptable. As the march began, discipline held. Lines were straight. Pace was steady. Commands echoed down the formation. But beneath the precision, hearts raced. Not from anticipation of battle. From something else. Something unnamed. The first warning was not dramatic. It was quiet. A routine radio check was initiated, standard procedure, repeated dozens of times a day. The operator adjusted the dial, waited for the familiar response tone. Nothing came back. At first, no one reacted. Static failures happened often. Terrain could interfere. Weather could distort signals. The protocol was simple: retry. The second attempt produced the same result. Silence. A secondary channel was activated, then a third. Still nothing. Officers exchanged brief looks, careful not to let concern show. The order was given to continue forward while technicians attempted to restore contact. No alarms were raised. Yet unease had already begun to spread. Scouts assigned to advanced positions failed to report in at the scheduled time. Again, this was not unheard of. Delays happened, routes changed, signals were missed. But when the delay extended beyond acceptable margins, someone made a note. Then another. And another. Markers placed earlier along the route, small but precise indicators meant to guide movement, were missing. Not damaged, not displaced. Gone. As the formation advanced, some soldiers began to notice something difficult to describe. A sense that sound behaved differently. Voices carried oddly. Footsteps echoed when they shouldn't have. Others felt the opposite. A strange dampening, as if noise was being absorbed. One soldier later recalled that commands sounded farther away than they should have, even when shouted from only a few meters ahead. Another claimed he could hear marching that didn't match the rhythm of his unit. No one spoke about it openly. Discipline held them silent. Then came the gaps. Not physical ones at first, but procedural. A roll count was requested. The numbers didn't quite match expectations, close enough to ignore, close enough to blame on miscommunication. Still, the discrepancy was logged. A few men reported seeing movement in their peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when they turned their heads. Fatigue was blamed. Long marches played tricks on the mind. Orders emphasized focus, forward attention, no turning back. Stopping was discouraged. Questions were postponed. As time passed, Landmarks began to feel unfamiliar. The terrain matched the map, yet something about distance felt wrong. What should have taken minutes seemed to take far longer. Or far less. No enemy contact was reported. No shots. No warnings. This absence became unsettling. War was loud, predictable in its violence. This was neither. Radio silence continued. An officer attempted direct line communication with rear units. The signal connected briefly, then cut out mid-transmission. The words were never recovered. At this point, tension was no longer hidden. It sat heavy in posture and movement. Soldiers tightened grips on equipment. Breathing grew shallow. Yet the march continued, because stopping meant admitting uncertainty. And uncertainty spread faster than fear. Another roll count was taken. This time, the discrepancy was larger. Still not enough to halt the operation, still explainable on paper. But the unease deepened. Some soldiers became convinced they were being followed. Others felt they were walking into something unseen. A few claimed the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. None of this appeared in official logs. Only what could be measured was recorded. And what could be measured made less sense with every passing minute. Then someone realized something truly wrong. A unit commander looked down the line and saw fewer men than before. Not scattered, not fleeing, simply fewer. The order was given to close ranks. The formation tightened, but the space did not fill. And for the first time, no one could explain why. The march slowed. Voices dropped. Eyes scanned forward into territory that looked unchanged, yet felt completely unfamiliar. And without knowing it, they crossed a point from which warnings no longer mattered. It did not begin with a sound. That was the most disturbing part. The march continued at reduced pace. Boots still struck the ground, but the rhythm was uneven now. Commands were issued more frequently, as if repetition could restore order. Close ranks. Maintain spacing. Eyes forward. Men obeyed. They always did. Then one soldier slowed. Not intentionally. Not dramatically. His step hesitated, just for a moment, long enough for the man behind him to nearly collide. An irritated curse followed. The formation adjusted. And when they looked again, the soldier who had slowed was no longer there. No shout. No fall. No sign he had turned aside. Just empty space. An officer barked for silence, ordered the line to keep moving. One missing man could still be explained. Fatigue, miscount, a mistake. But the feeling changed. A pressure settled in the chest. A tightening behind the eyes. The air seemed heavier now. Breathing required effort, as if each inhale had to push through resistance. Someone laughed nervously. The sound stopped too quickly. Another soldier turned his head, just slightly, to check alignment. The man beside him was gone. Panic brushed the edge of discipline. Hold formation, came the shout. But voices no longer carried properly. Commands sounded distant even when they were close. Words arrived late, distorted, sometimes incomplete. The march slowed further. Men began counting steps in their heads, as if rhythm alone could anchor them to reality. 1, 2, 3. A loud metallic clatter rang out as equipment struck the ground. A helmet rolled across the dirt. No one saw it fall. A soldier stepped forward to retrieve it. Then stopped. The ground where it rested looked wrong. Not broken. Not disturbed. Just unfamiliar. He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. The space beside him emptied. Not violently. Not suddenly. One moment occupied. The next vacant. The formation broke. Officers shouted conflicting orders: advance, halt, close ranks, pull back. No response came from the rear units. Signals were raised. Nothing answered. Sound itself seemed unreliable now. Footsteps echoed unevenly. Voices overlapped in strange ways. Some men heard shouting that others insisted never happened. A section of the line surged forward, trying to regain cohesion. They moved into clear ground and did not emerge on the other side. Those watching saw no struggle, no resistance, no collapse. They simply failed to appear again. The remaining soldiers stopped. No one spoke. The wind passed through the gaps where men should have stood. It carried the faint smell of oil, sweat, metal, evidence of presence without presence itself. A senior officer attempted to reassert control. He ordered a full halt, ordered everyone to stand exactly where they were. Only part of the force heard him. Others stood frozen, unsure whether to move or remain. Then the ground vibrated. Not an explosion. Not machinery. Something subtler. A sensation more than a sound. Several soldiers reported later that it felt like standing near distant thunder, heard through the body rather than the ears. Weapons were raised. Nothing appeared. A soldier called out a name. No reply. Another shouted for his unit. Only fragments answered back. The formation was no longer a formation. It was a collection of men separated by growing emptiness, unsure whether stepping forward or backward would make any difference. One man tried to run. He made it 3 steps. Those closest swore he blurred, just slightly before vanishing. Not falling. Not pulled. Gone. At that moment, discipline collapsed. Not into chaos, but paralysis. Men stood rigid, afraid to move, afraid not to. Eyes wide, breathing shallow, fingers numb on weapon grips that suddenly felt useless. An officer ordered everyone to drop to one knee. Only some did. Others were already gone. Time lost meaning, seconds stretched, minutes compressed. No one could later agree how long it lasted. Some believed it was moments. Others insisted it was far longer. The sound of marching, once deafening, was now absent. No footsteps. No commands. Just the wind. And the growing certainty that the rules no longer applied. Then, as abruptly as it had intensified, it stopped. The pressure eased. The strange vibrations faded. Silence returned, not empty but complete. Those who remained looked around in disbelief. More than half the force was missing. Not scattered. Not wounded. Missing. No sign of retreat. No evidence of engagement. No trace of where they had gone. Weapons lay abandoned where hands had released them mid-step. Equipment rested neatly on the ground, as if placed there. No bodies. No blood. Nothing that fit any known explanation. A final roll count was attempted. It failed. No one could agree on the numbers. Some men began speaking at once, others couldn't speak at all. An order was given to regroup. Another to withdraw. But withdrawal from where and from what? As the survivors stood in stunned silence, one thought settled over them all, unspoken yet shared. Whatever had just happened was over. But it was not finished. Because the emptiness left behind felt intentional. And nothing in their training had prepared them for that. The response began with urgency. Orders were issued within minutes of the halt. Surviving officers re-established command structure, assigning temporary unit leaders where gaps had formed. Discipline was restored, not because fear had passed, but because fear demanded order. Search teams were organized immediately. Small groups. Clearly marked routes. Strict time limits. No one was allowed to move alone. The first patrols followed the path of the march itself. They moved slowly, scanning the ground for signs of deviation, footprints, discarded equipment, anything that could suggest where the missing had gone. They found nothing. No disturbed earth. No dragged marks. No indication of sudden movement or retreat. The ground showed a continuous trail of marching boots, and then nothing beyond the point where the formation had broken. As if thousands of men had reached a boundary and simply stopped existing beyond it. Command widened the search. Units fanned outward to the left and right, advancing in careful lines. Each patrol carried signaling equipment and was ordered to report every few minutes. Reports came back quickly. Negative findings. Clear terrain. No contact. Aerial reconnaissance was requested. The request was logged, then delayed. Air units reported poor visibility conditions that did not match ground observations. When aircraft finally passed over the area, their reports added confusion instead of clarity. They saw no mass movement. No bodies. No encampments. Nothing consistent with the disappearance of such a large force. Meanwhile, interviews began. Survivors were questioned separately. Statements were recorded in detail, time estimates, positions, commands heard, commands missed. The problem became obvious almost immediately. The accounts did not align. Some soldiers insisted the disappearance happened gradually. Others claimed it was sudden. Several could not agree on which units vanished first. Even the number of missing varied wildly between reports. Timelines conflicted by hours. Distances conflicted by kilometers. Officers attempted to reconcile the differences, assuming stress had distorted memory. But even basic facts, such as when the march began to slow, could not be established with certainty. Radio logs were reviewed next. They were incomplete. Several transmissions referenced by survivors did not appear in the records. Others appeared in logs but were not remembered by anyone present. Timestamps overlapped. Signal origins were unclear. Technicians blamed equipment failure. Investigators were unconvinced. Maps were examined and re-examined. The route was checked for deviations. Nothing suggested the force had strayed far enough to lose cohesion on that scale. A theory emerged that some units had advanced ahead of the main body and become separated. But if that were true, they should have left signs. They had not. As the hours passed, the search expanded further outward, but confidence quietly diminished. Patrol leaders began reporting an unsettling pattern. No matter how far they went, nothing changed. The land remained undisturbed. The silence unbroken. Eventually, the tone of the operation shifted. Less urgency. More caution. Orders were modified. Searches became shorter. Boundaries were set that patrols were not to cross without explicit permission. No reason was given. Witnesses were instructed not to discuss what they had seen or failed to see outside official debriefings. This was framed as standard operational security. But the language used was unusually strict. Written reports were edited before being filed. Certain phrases were removed. Others were replaced with vague terminology. Loss of contact, unconfirmed movement, unknown outcome. Numbers were adjusted. Not erased but softened. Requests for external investigation were denied. High Command ruled that the situation was under control and further speculation would damage morale. Families were notified using carefully chosen wording. No explanations were offered. Internally, the investigation stalled. Not because every possibility had been exhausted, but because none led anywhere acceptable. There was no enemy to pursue. No terrain feature to blame. No mistake large enough to account for what had occurred. And so quietly the focus shifted. From finding the missing to containing the questions. Files related to the incident were reclassified. Access was restricted. Some documents were archived under unrelated categories. Others were marked incomplete. Witnesses were reassigned to different units. Some were sent home. A few were never interviewed again. Officially, the operation concluded with no definitive findings. Unofficially, uncertainty remained. Because every investigation ends with a conclusion. Unless the conclusion itself is the problem. And in this case, the absence of answers was the only consistent result. When official investigations stalled, explanations began to form elsewhere. Not announced, not endorsed, but discussed quietly, first in closed briefings, then in margins of reports, then in places with no records at all. The first theory was the simplest: disorientation and fragmentation. According to this view, the force did not vanish. It broke apart. Poor communication, fatigue, and unfamiliar terrain caused units to drift, lose cohesion, and scatter beyond recovery. On paper, it made sense. Large formations had collapsed before. Confusion had led to catastrophic losses in other campaigns. But this theory had a flaw. Fragmentation leaves evidence. Separated units leave trails. Footprints diverge. Equipment is abandoned unevenly. Here, nothing diverged. The march path ended cleanly, not frayed, not chaotic. Just incomplete. The second theory pointed outward. An unseen enemy maneuver. Proponents suggested a highly coordinated operation, one designed not to destroy, but to remove. A tactic so advanced it left no conventional trace. This explanation gained brief traction. It allowed responsibility to shift away from command decisions. It framed the event as an act of war rather than an internal failure. But it raised immediate questions. No opposing force ever claimed credit. No intelligence later confirmed such a capability. No similar operation was ever documented again. Wars repeat what works. This did not repeat. The theory faded quietly. The third explanation focused on the environment itself. Natural or atmospheric conditions, unusual weather patterns, optical distortions, effects on sound and perception that could disorient large groups simultaneously. Investigators reviewed meteorological data. Some irregularities were noted: temperature shifts, wind behavior that did not align with forecasts. But again, the scale did not match. Weather confuses. It delays. It exhausts. It does not selectively erase. And it does not explain missing equipment, incomplete logs, or the failure of basic measurements like time and distance reported by survivors. Then there was the theory that was never officially acknowledged. The one that appeared briefly, and then vanished from discussion entirely. This explanation suggested the incident did not fit within existing military frameworks at all, that it represented something unknown, something not accounted for in training, doctrine, or historical precedent. It was never fully written down, only referenced. Indirectly, certain files mention unclassified anomalies. Others note non-replicable conditions. Witnesses later claimed they were discouraged from describing specific sensations, not because they were false, but because they were unhelpful. What made this theory unsettling was not its content. It was the response to it. Documents associated with it were refiled under unrelated subjects. Requests to revisit it were denied without explanation. Officers who pressed too hard found themselves reassigned. No official denial was ever issued. Silence replaced it. Over time, records thinned. Early drafts of reports differed significantly from final versions. Dates shifted, numbers rounded, language softened. Some testimonies referenced in summaries could no longer be located. When asked years later, officials responded consistently. There was no single conclusion. Which was true, but incomplete. Because investigations do not end this way, unless conclusions exist that cannot be shared. As decades passed, the incident became a footnote, a statistical anomaly, a case study in uncertainty. Yet among historians, one detail remains difficult to ignore. The files that survived are not marked resolved. They are marked inactive, not closed, not disproven, just set aside, waiting. And that raises a final, uncomfortable question. If none of the theories fully explain what happened, what explanation was considered, and then deliberately removed? In the end, history did what it often does. It moved on. New offensives replaced old ones. Fresh reports buried unanswered questions. The war demanded attention elsewhere, and silence became easier than explanation. The missing were counted once more, then counted less, then remembered only as figures on a page. No memorial marked the exact place where they vanished. No official account explained how a force so large could be reduced so completely without a single confirmed moment of destruction. Instead, there were phrases: loss of contact, operational failure, unknown outcome, words chosen not to clarify, but to conclude. Those who remained carried on. Some spoke rarely of that march. Others never mentioned it at all. A few tried to record what they remembered, only to find their accounts dismissed as unreliable or incomplete. Time blurred details, but not the absence, because absence has weight. Maps still show the route they took. Archives still contain folders labeled with dates and unit numbers. And yet, when examined closely, those records feel hollow, like outlines drawn around something that should be there but is. What makes this incident endure is not what is known. It is what was never resolved. An army does not simply diminish by half without consequence. A mystery of that scale does not fade naturally. It is pushed aside, locked away, left untouched because opening it again risks uncovering something no one was prepared to face. Perhaps the truth challenged understanding. Perhaps it threatened confidence. Or perhaps it offered no answer at all. And that, more than anything, was unacceptable. They marched in with structure, discipline, and certainty. And fewer than half walked out, with no clear reason why. So the question remains, unchanged by time. Was this a tragedy of war? Or something history chose not to name? Backhand index pointing down. What do you think happened to the rest? Share your theory in the comments.